So, welcome everybody to the May edition of Behaviour Matters webinars, which is all about mastering the art of leadership agility to get the best from your team. For those of you who perhaps don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan and I'm the founding partner of Jigsaw Discovery and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery tool. And for the last 22 plus years now, I've been very much immersed in the world of learning and development, both in the creating and designing programs, learning solutions, and obviously within the delivery side of it as well. And my kind of background and real kind of interest over the last 20 years has been very much in the world of psychology, sociology, and latterly for the last 12 years now, in the world of neuroscience, and looking at what science is saying and informing us, and then applying that into the world of work. And for the last about 30 years now, I've actually been a mindful practitioner and have my own mindfulness practice. So in the ever-increasing globalization and organizational complexity that we've seen over the last decade, this has led to new challenges and demands. We're living in we often hear it referred to as a VUCA world, where we're surrounded by volatility and uncertainty, complexity. The needs of our workforce are changing and becoming increasingly more diverse. Post-pandemic, we're seeing that people have very different expectations of their leaders, their managers, their organisations. The pace of change is faster than ever before. Performance and productivity expectations are continually growing, and at the same time, resources are becoming more and more scarce. Leadership is no longer a skill that should just be reserved for the C-suite. Leaders are required to, at all levels of an organisation, and leaders are now required to be able to influence up, influence down and across an organisation. Leadership is more demanding than ever before because leaders are still required to engage, inspire and motivate their people to achieve, despite the complexity of hybrid working, the uncertainty of the economy. A workforce who are already fatigued and burnt out from the events of the last 2 years. And if that's not enough, we now have the added worry of the spiralling cost of living and the war in Ukraine. So developing leadership skills has never been more important than it is today. And leaders need to be able to be agile, to be able to quickly adapt their leadership style, to build positive and meaningful relationships with colleagues, clients, stakeholders from very diverse backgrounds and cultures. So on our agenda today, in the webinar, we're going to be exploring and discussing what science says about how leaders evolve and develop their leadership behaviours. We're going to be talking about leaders' needs and expectations of team members to get the results that they require delivered. We're going to be talking about drivers and expectations, motivations of individual team members and ways in which leaders can leverage their knowledge of team members to increase team working and effectiveness. We're going to be looking at aligning leadership behaviours to get the best from a team in any situation. And we're going to be looking at practical actions and ways to increase leadership agility. One of the big passions at Jigsaw, and I've already touched on it, is to listen to what science tells us, which is not always what conventional wisdom would have us believe. But one thing that we do know from science is that the brain, as powerful as it is, can easily be overloaded if we don't respect its capacity and its limitations. We know that we're more likely to remember things if we break complex things down into smaller chunks. So we've broken our content down into 4 chapters for the purposes of today. In chapter 1, we're going to be looking at establishing the need for agility. Chapter 2, we're focusing on how leaders evolve. In 3, we're looking at aligning needs and expectations. And in 4, we're looking at those practical tips and ways to increase leadership agility. So moving straight into chapter 1 then, the need for agility. So on the screen, you will see 10, I think it is 12 famous leaders. And just because I know that we've got quite a diverse audience with us today from around the world, then just to quickly run through those people, if we start on the top row, we've got the current UK president, Volodymyr Zelensky. We've got Angela Merkel, the ex-German leader, Richard Branson coming down onto the second line, Oprah Winfrey, the American TV personality, chat host, Reese Witherspoon, from Legally Blonde, an actress in Legally Blonde, the lead actress there, but now turned businesswoman. We've got Her Majesty the Queen, the Dalai Lama. We've got Margaret Thatcher, the ex-UK Prime Minister, Mahatma Gandhi, Steve Jobs from Apple, Princess Diana, and last but not least, Mr. Simon Cowell himself from X Factor fame. So we're going to do a little activity now. And what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment, I am going to give you a situation. And I'm going to ask you to think about which of these leaders you would want as your leader in the particular situation I give you. Now, the way we're going to do this, we're going to use a technique that I call chat and hold. So I'm going to ask you the scenario, ask you who you want to be your leader in that scenario, then ask you to actually put your answer in chat, but do not press send until I ask you to press send. So we're all going to be sending together, okay? So looking at those leaders on screen that we've just gone through, as I say, what I'm wanting to know is which one of those leaders would you want to be your leader in a business crisis? So just pop into chat, but don't press send yet. Which one of those leaders would you want to be your leader in a business crisis? Okay, if you can press send now. Got Steve Jobs coming up. Her Majesty the Queen. Any more? So at the moment we've got Steve Jobs and Her Majesty the Queen. That's the two that we would like to be our leaders in a business crisis. Okay, let's try another scenario then. Which one of those leaders would you like if you needed a coach? Which one of those leaders would you like to be your coach? Again, type it in chat, but don't press send until we say. I'll just give you a moment to think about that one. And if you want to start and press send now, Mahatma Gandhi, Oprah, Branson, some real diverse kind of answers there, different answers on that particular one. Brilliant. So who would you like to give you some feedback when you know your performance isn't great? Again, in chat and hold. And if you want to press send now. So we've got the Dalai Lama, we've got Gandhi. Yeah, interesting. Any more? Any more thoughts from anybody? Sorry, I was too quick off the matter. It's fine, Claire, don't worry, no problem. Okay, so what we can actually see there, and that's really great, I hope it's just got you kind of thinking, even if you haven't popped your answer in chat, then I hope it's got you thinking about the kind of the different leaders, the different leadership styles that you would like in any given situation, in different situations. So another question for you, and you can just type just one word in chat for this one. Are leaders born or made? So just pop it in chat, just type your answer and send it straight away. That's fine, you don't have to hold on this one. Made coming through. Any difference of opinion from made? Made. We'll all agree that leaders are made and not born. Yeah, absolutely. And although some of the traits of great leaders may appear to be inherent, leadership is a skill that can be learned. Even traits that are considered innate, such as creativity, can be developed and enhanced. And of course, yeah, many leaders do utilize their natural inherent traits. And that's really, really important, that we do actually look at how our own strengths, our own traits can actually help and support us in our roles as leaders, organizations, team members, etc. So if anybody's got any questions, please, by all means, do ask them as we go through. That's fine, or you can keep them till the end if you prefer to do that as well. So let's move on to chapter 2 now, and let's take a look at how leaders evolve and develop. So the question that I get asked the most when speaking about behavioural preferences is, do they change over time? Sometimes on a Jigsaw experience, I'll actually hear leaders saying things such as, well, if I'd have done this 5 years ago, it would have been very different. So according to Carl Jung, and he's a psychologist whose work underpins the majority of... Can we make sure we're all on mute? So Carl Jung is the psychologist whose work underpins the majority of profiling tools that are available out there today. So according to Carl Jung, over the duration of an individual's life, there is a shift in focus on the different mental processes. And by different mental processes, I mean thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition, the things that influence a person's behaviour. Now, initially, an individual tends to focus upon the strongest 2 mental processes, something which Jung referred to as the specialist stage. And then Jung says that later in life, there is a shift in focus as we actually start to become more of an all-rounder, more what he called the generalist, and work on developing some of our weaker or backup mental processes. I'm sure we've all either said it ourselves or heard other people say things such as, I'm much more assertive now than I used to be, or I've mellowed over the years, in reference to how they've perceived their behaviour to change over a period of time. So when considering behavioural preferences as opposed to personality styles, research has demonstrated that behavioural preferences are much more fluid. They can be learned and developed using what's known as the plasticity of the brain. That's its ability to create and build new neural pathways. Hence, new behaviours can be formed and developed. We also know from evidence neuroscience that the things we pay attention to develop in strength. Hence, if we believe about the way in which our mental processes naturally develop and integrate that with what we know about the plasticity of the brain, this can provide some real great insights into how we can develop leaders and their leadership behaviours to improve effectiveness within organisations. So a quick question for you. How does your organisation recruit and develop leaders? How do you recruit and develop the leaders in your organisation? If you just want to perhaps put a quick answer in chat for me, that would be absolutely brilliant. How does your organisation recruit and develop leaders? Mentoring and coaching, brilliant. Mentors, leadership development programs. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so let's just think about what typically happens in still today in many organisations. So a team member does a really great job. They get noticed. A supervisory position becomes available. And the team member, via, after interviews, etc., the team member gets promoted. And on a Friday, they're the team member. But when they return to work on the Monday, they're now the team leader. And they're required to have a whole new set of skills and behaviours, which, generally speaking, are often influenced. The new skills and behaviours are often using the lesser preferred mental processes. Now, the probability, according to, if we apply Jung's theory, is that at this point in time, the individual has developed their first and second preferences and are skillfully using those behaviours. And that's why they're standing out as an exceptional team member, a great team member. But it's possible that the chances are that at this time, they haven't yet explored and developed their third and fourth mental processes. So what I'd just like you all to do is, just with using a piece of scrap paper is absolutely fine. I'd just like you to write your first and last name, please. Just write your first and last name. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is put your pen in the other hand and use your first and write your first and last name again, please. Okay, so second time around, what did that feel like? Do you just want to pop a word or two in chat for me? What did it feel like? What did you notice about it second time around? Almost impossible. Strange, had to concentrate. Yeah, absolutely. Awkward. Yeah, absolutely. The analogy I use when an individual is required to use those lesser developed behaviours, it can be likened to writing with the wrong hand, just as you have done now. It feels awkward, it takes longer, it requires more concentration, and ultimately is far more draining on our energy. However, just as with the handwriting, and if you've ever broken your dominant hand and had to write with your non-dominant hand for a few weeks or months, then you'll notice that over that period of time, the handwriting does improve. It does become a little bit easier, and exactly is the same with our lesser dominant behaviours. If we start to practice them, focus, give our attention to them, the easier they will become, because we start to form new neural pathways and we strengthen existing pathways that existed within the brain. Elizabeth said it's tricky too. It is tricky. So as a leader's career progresses, the need to become less of a specialist and more of a generalist tends to increase, which means that leaders have to be able to access all the different behavioural preferences, their behavioural styles. So to be an effective leader, an individual must develop their behaviours and skills to provide inspiration, engagement, motivation, to move team members towards the achievement of those organisational goals. But at the same time, they've got to balance that focus on skills and behaviours using their opposing mental processes, such as setting strategic direction, analysing data, predicting future trends, clarifying desired results, and removing barriers which are hindering progress. So great leaders are the ones who have learnt to actually flex their leadership style, to move with ease around what we call the behavioural map, accessing not only their dominant, but also their secondary mental processes. They adapt their style to accommodate the needs of the people and the situation they face. And they neither overuse or underuse their behaviours. They know exactly what is required and when it's required. What behaviour, what style to use in what situation. And that's what we do with our Jigsaw behavioural map. It enables leaders to plan their leadership development by building on existing behavioural preferences, mapping out a development plan, and then helping them to create new and strengthening existing neural networks to help them increase their leadership agility. So great leaders have high levels of self-awareness, an understanding of the complex interplay between people and their behaviour, their values, their beliefs, their skills. And they're always looking to continuously be developing and improving their leadership abilities. It's a journey that they go on. Great leaders are constantly moving through that leadership development progress. They're taking stock of where they're at now. They're identifying new desired behaviours. They're focusing their attention on developing existing and new behaviours. They're measuring the results of the outcomes of their behaviours. And they're actively encouraging and asking for feedback that helps them to revisit that self-awareness, and then they can embark on the next journey through that development process. So great leaders recognise the need to continue to evolve and to have that agility to adapt their behaviours, to respond in the most effective way to any given situation and the individual people involved. I'm just going to give you just a moment just to reflect, just a bit of quiet reflection. I'm not going to ask you to share anything, just to reflect upon your own kind of development and how you've evolved and how you continue to evolve. Do you take the time to ask for feedback? Do you encourage feedback? Do you evaluate the impact of your behaviours on others and identify new desired behaviours that you can focus on in the future? So as I say, I'll be quiet for a moment and let you just focus on your own involvement and development as a leader. In progress. So let's move now on to chapter 3. And in our third chapter, we're going to be focusing upon the expectations of leaders and the needs of team members, and that importance of leaders having a deep understanding of the behaviours and motivations of individuals within their team. So the first thing I'd like you to do, and you perhaps need a little piece of paper to do this in initially, is I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to jot down, make a note of the skills, the attitudes, the knowledge and behaviours that you require from the individuals in your team in order to deliver the team objectives. So just make a note of the skills, attitudes, knowledge, behaviours that you require from your team members in order to deliver the team objectives. So hopefully you've managed to put down on paper, and obviously again, if we were doing this in a workshop situation, we'd be taking much longer about it, but hopefully you've got down a few of the kind of key skills, attitudes, knowledge, behaviours that you need from your individual team members. So what I'm going to do now, I've actually split you up into 3 breakout rooms. In a moment, I'm going to send you into the breakout rooms. So you'll get a notification on screen to say about you need to accept to move into a breakout room. You'll be in your breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and then you'll get a time to say that your time is coming to an end, a notification to say time's coming to an end, and you'll be able to come back into the main room at that point. You will automatically be kicked back into the main room if you just want to sit it out, if you're deep in conversation when you notice that the last 60 seconds are approaching. So what I'd like you to do in breakout rooms is actually just discuss what you've individually come up with. Now, I'm sure there'll be some similarities, but there'll probably also be differences. And we're not looking for a consensus here. If anything, we're actually looking for the differences that you each individually actually look for within your team, or want, need, require from your team. So any questions from anybody before we move into your breakouts? If you have, by all means, you can unmute yourself and just ask, or no. Okay, so I'm about to open our breakout rooms then. So you'll be going to your breakout room. So you're discussing what individually you've come up with, looking for those similarities, but not looking for a consensus, and just really focusing, we're looking for those differences. Well, welcome back, everybody. So most of us are back now. So what are some of the biggest differences? And please, if you want to just unmute to share this, it's probably easier than trying to put it all in chat, but it's entirely up to you. What were some of the biggest differences in terms of what the people within your small groups expect from their team and need from their team? Somebody want to just share with us what it is that they expect from their teams? What were some of those biggest differences that you found amongst your group? As I say, you can pop it in chat, or if it's easier to unmute yourself, please unmute yourself.
I don't think we got very far necessarily enough. That not through lack of interest at all. I think that involving and flexibility were the main themes that came out of our brief. We didn't really get to similarities and differences, I'm afraid, in the time.
No, that's all right, no problem. Anybody else? Mostly skills that somebody's put in chat, not much differences, mostly qualities and skills we haven't thought of before. Yeah. Anybody else got anything that they particularly noticed? Okay, well, two kind of things just to reflect on, because I appreciate, I mean, we're very time scarce within an hour's work to do things like this, but just kind of things to reflect on is, after having done an activity like that, is thinking about what are some of those biggest differences and what factors could lead to those differences. And this is a really powerful activity if it's done within an organization. So you've got all managers, leaders from one organization, and you find that there's lots of kind of differences there, because think about the effect that that then has on team members. If team members don't have this awareness of behavioural profiling and don't understand these kind of things, then you've got all these different leaders and managers within one organisation, all with very different needs and expectations of team members. And that's one of the reasons why behavioural profiling is not something that should just be reserved for the managers. It should be across an organisation. So just moving on now, having identified your needs and expectations of team members, the next thing that we must do then is start to focus on the needs of our team members. So not our needs, but the needs of team members. And this is where having that deep understanding of the needs and motivations of individual team members is really, really important. So on screen, there's just a few examples of the needs of each of the four, what we call the Jigsaw behavioural preferences as team members. So I'm just going to use myself initially as an example here. So personally, my natural leadership preference, my natural behavioural preference is red. And I'm quite a strong dominant, what we call red. Now that means that I expect, in my natural style, I expect team members to deliver on what they say they will do. If somebody commits to something, I expect them to deliver that. I want people to work at a similar pace to myself, quite a fast kind of pace. I want to give people the outcome that I want, the resources they need to do it, and the timeline. But then I just expect them to get on with it and just go away, decide how they'll do it, just get on with it, do it, deliver it. I have a kind of a joke between myself and a colleague, and he says that my style is just do it. And that's so, so true. I want people to be direct and to the point with me. If they don't think something's possible, I want them to tell me it's not possible. And I actually, in that natural red style, have a tendency to value the person by the outcomes they deliver. So, question then. I have a team, as all of us will have teams, who have diverse needs, expectations, behavioural preferences. So when I'm interacting with a team member who has a higher green preference, and again, please unmute or pop in chat, whichever, what do you think could be the impact if I didn't adapt my natural red style when interacting with this person who's got a green preference, a higher green preference? What's your thoughts? How might I be perceived by that individual if I fail to understand or notice their actual needs and motivations as a green preference person? Any thoughts? As I say, pop it in chat or unmute, whichever is easiest for you to do. Demanding and rude. Yeah, absolutely, Claire. Any other thoughts? They'll tend to exit the team to avoid conflict. Yeah. Or disconnect, resistance, conflict, or just ignore. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm certainly not giving enough positive feedback. A green will likely retract when dealing with a red, and as such you won't get the best. Exactly, Tim, exactly that. I was just about to say, I won't actually get what the best from that individual, the things that I'm actually needing. So I need to start to be more agile, to adapt my style. What do you think would be if I was interacting with, let's say, a blue team member? What would be the differences there? What would be the things that I would need to be really aware of? What would I need to do in order to adapt my style to come closer, do you think, to the blue preference, the blue needs? Give them time and information. Yeah. Big, big things. A blue, still a thinking preference, but tends to work at a different pace to a red. They need a lot more information and detail. So an analogy I often say to people is, if I was speaking red to red, I would say, right, okay, I need you to be in Glasgow for 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. End of. That's it. If I was speaking red to blue, I would need to explain I needed to be in Blackpool's going to say, in Glasgow, 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. This is the information. This is the details of the train tickets, the timetable, etc., etc. This is the why behind it all. So I need to give them a lot more specific detail and information. So again, just take a moment to think about your own natural style. Are you more a red, yellow, a green or blue style naturally yourself? And think about your team members. What are their kind of styles and preferences? And what do you have to do? What do you think you might have to do, or do you already do, to align your style more with individual team members? So I'm not going to ask you for feedback again, just a little bit of personal kind of reflection on that one, I think. Okay, so I just want to now just take a very quick overview of each of the 4 leadership styles. Fortunately, we don't have that luxury of time to go deep into them as we would do in a workshop, but just to give you a feel for each of the styles. So our first style we'll start with today is our blue style, what we call the instructor. Now, the blue style places a priority in carrying out work correctly. Rather than focusing on who does it, it's who will do the work correctly. They tend to provide a step-by-step plan for completing the work to account for, you know, they'll kind of look at any possible things, problems that could occur, and will give you kind of strategies to overcome those in advance. They closely supervise the work and they explain explaining why the work needs to be done. They don't particularly always focus on, for them, it's not important. It just needs to be done. Therefore, this is how we need to do it. And here's the step-by-step plan. But the blue leader makes all the decisions. So a question for you. Can you give me an example? And again, type it in chat, is fine. An example of when the blue style, that instructor style, giving all the information, all the details, a step-by-step guide for how it's to be done, would be appropriate. What kind of situations do you think you might want to use that kind of style with? A complex task, yeah. Any other thoughts? New employees in an emergency. Yeah. So a couple of good examples there of when we might use life and death matters. Yeah, absolutely. Military. Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at our green style then, what we call the educator. Now, the educator places priority on selling work to people and talking about having it carried out correctly. So the green leader continues to tell people what needs to be done, the why and the how, but also seeks to involve them in that decision-making process. They openly discuss with people the best way to complete a task by asking them open questions. And although the green leader actually does make that final decision, it's more of an agreement with the individual team member. It feels like that the team member's been involved. It feels like they've come to some sort of agreement. So in what kind of situations might that style, the educator style, be more appropriate? Any thoughts on that one? Health and safety scenarios in a research lab. Yeah, absolutely. Again, some great ideas there coming through. Brilliant. So our third style, the encourager, places priority on helping people to work things out for themselves, helping them to think about how to complete a task themselves. They explain what's needed to be achieved, and then they encourage people to work out how to do it. And it's a kind of a shared decision-making process. So the yellow leader tends to be more of a helper and a guide, facilitator, facilitating those ideas, perhaps pointing out factors, points that they've overlooked, and encouraging and giving confidence. So again, when might you use this style, do you think? Problem solving in certain baseline knowledge situations, yeah. To get ideas from the team, networking, yeah, those chaotic and unexpected change environments, creative needs. Yeah. So our last style then, red, the red leader, the authorizer, as we call them. They place priority in giving responsibility for decision making to the other person. allowing them to go solo. Just as I kind of said, you know, I give people the kind of the brief, the top level kind of information, when it needs to be done by, make sure they've got the resources and let them go, let them make the decision. So in a way, this kind of style shows that kind of mark of trust. And it's more of a relationship, more of kind of colleague rather than manager, team member type of relationships. Red leaders won't supervise very closely. They'll keep an eye on things, but they won't supervise really closely. So when might that style be appropriate, do you think? And any examples of the red style, where the range of task outcomes is less critical? And style operations like time sensitive, where you have an experienced team. Yeah, good one. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so that's just a quick kind of introduction, overview to those 4 kind of leadership styles, again, at a very high level, obviously. So having an understanding of yourself as a leader and linking that to people's behavioural preferences, that's one thing. But being able to flex your style to best suit the individuals and the teams that you lead in a specific task or scenario adds another layer of complexity to your thinking and behavioural choices. So to do this, it's important to understand the 2 elements about individuals that you're assigning work to. And those elements are, firstly, how skillful are they in a task or a scenario? So their competence level. And secondly, how aware are they of their level of skill, their consciousness level? So for those of you who may not be so familiar with this particular model, competence is a function of the person's task knowledge and skills gained either through formal education, on the job training, or just sheer kind of experience. And in determining a person's competence level, then leaders need to consider the person's knowledge of the organisation, as well as any transferable skills they may have, planning, time management, interpersonal skills, etc., that are all kind of important for the accomplishment of a specific task or scenario. Consciousness, that's what drives the person's motivation and confidence. The motivation is the person's interest and enthusiasm for the task and that desire to succeed. And the confidence is that person's sense of security, of self-assuredness, if you like, the extent to which they believe and trust that they've got those abilities to deliver this task. So if we look now at each one of these 4 quadrants in turn, starting with that kind of low competence and low consciousness quadrant, what we call the unconsciously incompetent. So this is the first stage of competence development journey. And this is where a person doesn't know the extent of the learning journey that lies ahead of them. So when presented with a task or scenario they know a little bit about, it can seem quite easy because they don't fully understand the skills that are needed. And a simple example of this is driving a car. When someone decides they want to learn to drive, well, how hard can it be when millions of people around the world all drive? It can't be that difficult. And that's what we call the unconsciously incompetent stage. People still have high confidence, but their skill level, actually, unbeknown to them, is quite low. So at this stage, which do you think of those 4 leadership, the red, yellow, green or blue, as 4 behavioural styles, would be most appropriate? Red, yellow, green or blue, do we think? If you want to pop it in chat, that would be great. Any ideas? Any thoughts? Red, yellow, green or blue, do you think you would go for the leadership style? What does this person at this stage need? We've got a yellow. Any other thoughts? Blue. Yeah, I'd actually, at this stage, people, another blue there, people need a bit of careful supervision. They need step-by-step instruction. Really, they need to be taught because they haven't got that skills, that knowledge at this stage to be able to complete that task. They may be highly motivated to do it, but they haven't got the skill level at this stage. So therefore, we need to give them more instruction about it. It's a little bit like when driving. The driving instructor tells you at this stage, when you're just starting out to drive, they tell you why you stalled the car, what you actually did that stalled the car. So it's the blue style that we use there. If we go to the next stage on the journey, where it's low competence, high consciousness. So this is where you've now got some experience and you actually realize the extent of the learning journey that's ahead of you. And when presented with a task at this stage, you can start to feel a little bit overwhelmed with the kind of perceived enormity of the task, of the skills, that gap between the skills you've actually got and the required skills level. And you can become a little bit self-doubting. So at this stage, it's labelled the consciously incompetent. They don't have the skills, but they now know they don't have the skills. So which of those 4, red, yellow, green, blue, so obviously we don't think it will be blue again, but green, yellow, red, which one of those do you think will be the best leadership style to employ here? And people at this stage are needing a little bit more support through that journey. Yeah, we've got greens coming through there. Yeah, absolutely. It's the green one. So this is where the driving instructor now asks you. They've told you previously why you stalled the car, but now they're asking you to help to start to build your confidence and show you what you do actually already know and start to build a little bit of confidence. So if we move into our third stage, then in our third stage, we're now in the consciously competent. So the person has a high level of competence to be able to complete the task, but they need to consciously think about what they are doing. They know what to do, and they've got some success in doing it, maybe not consistently. So it means that their confidence levels can actually vary from task to task, scenario to scenario. So at this stage, again, thinking about the car example, it's a little bit like learning to drive. You've passed your test and you're quite confident driving in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, for example. But when it comes to actually going on the dual carriageways, the highways, 70 miles an hour, speed limit roads, you're not quite as confident. So building on that then, tell me what at this stage, which do you think would be the best style to marry up with that? Red, yellow, green, or blue? Yep, we're getting the hang of this. The yellow, absolutely. Because people at this stage need encouragement. They need to be shown that they can do things. And they need just that kind of to have that support there in case they've got any questions, somebody really to encourage them, give them a gentle assertive push from time to time when they need it. So that's our yellow style there. Then moving into the last style, high competence, high consciousness. So the person now has a level of competence to be able to complete the task without really even having to think so hard about it. It's almost becoming an automated kind of process. They know what to do and have got success consistently in doing it. So that leads to a high level of confidence as well in their abilities. So this is an example using the car. It's when you get in your car, you turn the engine on, and the next thing that you're really aware of is you've arrived at your destination. You haven't consciously had to think about changing gear, checking mirrors, doing this, doing that, etc. throughout. So what's going to be the best leadership style at that stage, do you think? Red, absolutely the reds. It's going to be the reds, definitely. So there's our model, and we can see how the leadership kind of styles match into that model, and how we as leaders need to have that agility, depending on the situation, there's people involved, to be able to move through those 4 different styles. But that can be easier said than done. So in chapter 4, just kind of wrapping up in the last few minutes, we're going to look at our leadership agility tips. I'm going to share with you a few kind of practical things that you can do to start to develop your leadership agility skills, enabling you to be able to flex your style. So on the following slides, I've given you a few tips for each of the Jigsaw behavioural preferences, things that you might want to consider practicing so that they become more kind of natural habits and stop you from feeling like you're constantly having to write with the wrong hand when you kind of start to be more flexible and adapt to different behavioural styles. So if you are a red, if you have a red preference, then some of the things that you can do to start to practice being more agile, things such as making time for friendly, non-work related conversations, practice asking for opinions, adapting your communication style. They're all up there on the slide for you to see for yourselves, increasing your visibility by taking time out, walking around the office, actually having those face-to-face conversations with people. And the one other big thing is asking for and encouraging, actively encouraging feedback, and really acknowledging and letting people know that you really value their contribution. If you have a yellow preference, these are some of the things that we can start to do. Practice being present in the moment, being aware of what is happening now, and try to actually see projects through to a completion, to an end. Try to bring a little bit more clarity around your expectations of others. Perhaps try and give people a little bit more detail and direction in the scenarios, the situations that they need it. And just be mindful to listen to the concerns and issues of other people. And try just kind of giving them that space to explain fully, to give you all that detail without interrupting, which can be very difficult as an intuitive feeling individual. For our greens, if you have a green preference, these are some of the things here. To be more direct with people when it's appropriate, to encourage and debate diverse opinions and ideas and not perceive it as conflict. Don't be afraid to actually disagree with somebody and put a different perspective across. Practice speaking out and voicing your opinions, and delegate and ask for help without worrying about what other people are going to think. People who have a high green preference are very good at helping other people, but almost feel it's an imposition if they ask for help themselves. And last but not least, if you have a blue preference, try working really hard, practicing, trying to be more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, leaving things just to kind of work themselves out a little bit more, because we often find that if something arises, rather than trying to kind of explain it all right there and then in the moment, just by stepping back from it, giving it some space, things become much clearer as new information naturally comes to light. Develop that behaviour of collaboration and offering to share information and data. Discuss the strengths you can see in an idea or project before raising your concerns with it, rather than going straight in and raising concerns. Restrain from stepping in and taking a project over if you feel that somebody isn't doing it correctly, they're not doing it the right way. try and refrain, and perhaps flexing that style into more of a green coaching or yellow kind of style. So again, just a few kind of simple tips and things that you can do to start practicing that leadership kind of agility from the 4 different perspectives of the 4 different preferences. So one of the things I'm often asked is, what is the best behavioural profile for a leader? The answer I give is quite simply, if there is one, I've yet to discover it. Because leadership is situational. What works in one situation will not necessarily work in the next. The key to being a great leader is having higher levels of self-awareness and understanding of others and their situation, being authentic and acknowledging behavioural preferences for both yourself and other people, developing that leadership agility so you can navigate around your behavioural map or through your behavioural styles, asking for that open and genuine feedback, actively encouraging it, and using your learning from outcomes and feedback to further increase your own self-awareness. So successful leadership is not reliant on having a specific behavioural preference. It's about acknowledging and valuing behavioural strengths and focusing attention to develop a more generalised, agile approach. So as we come to the end of our time together, before I take any questions, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us and taking part in our interactive webinar, which I hope you found helpful.